A quick walk around of the suspension that's already under the car. This is a 73. They never put a 12 bolt in the 73, but this car has a 12 bolt in it. So somebody must have found a older 12 bolt out of a slightly older Camaro and put it under here, or taken a 12 bolt from something else and modified it, because it's got a 12 bolt with a posi, 378 I think gears, 373 gears in it. Anybody want a 12 bolt? Let me know. But as you can see, it's got the old leaf springs, just like the regular Camaro. It's got the addition of a aftermarket anti-roll bar in there. So it had been upgraded a little bit, but for the most part, still pretty antiquated. Nothing too special here. So let's go ahead and rip it all out. So I was pulling out the rear section of the exhaust system. I came across a rare specimen, the rare double hanger exhaust suspension. We've got one bar welded there, typical old like donut style rubber thing bolted to the same bolt, this other style little rubber insert there welded to the same exhaust. So don't exactly know what was going on here, but it was definitely held on with an interesting combination of a metric bolt and nut and a standard lag bolt straight into the side of the frame rail. So there's some shenanigans going on with this car. If I find any other interesting things, I'll be sure to show them. And lo and behold, I did find some more interesting things. This rear anti-sway bar is aftermarket, as you might can tell, but the mounting points they gave are these little U pockets that fit over the frame rail and they get welded in. Well, you can tell someone gave up here because there's a couple of holes where it looks like they tried to weld it and blew through. So these are just a couple of boogers sitting on here, really not doing much. So I'm hoping that won't take too much grinding to get off. It's the same on the other side. And then also this car came with some pretty crappy front subframe connectors on it, and I've since pulled them off long since ago, but they kind of were half welded to the spring perches, or these front spring pockets. And in order to do that, they've cut this piece out. They cut this rib out, and they didn't put a bolt in this side right there, so that bolt was missing. But because that bolt was missing, I guess they decided to go ahead and weld it with that really crappy weld. So now I got to come in and cut that out, and it's the same on the other side as well. So pretty poor workmanship on this part. So we'll get that all rectified as well. Here's the spring pockets out of the car. You can see where they kind of had hacked up this, and you can like that was, I don't know, that was over here, and they sliced it and pushed it out of the way. Here they sliced this. I don't know why they sliced that, but they sliced it. Here was the big ugly weld that I had to cut through. I will salvage this if I have to, but I think the replacement parts for these were like $70 for the set. So I'm gonna order them, cross my fingers that they're decent and work. Otherwise I'll be repairing these. I've got the rear end out of the car. Here it is. As I said, it's a 12 bolt, which isn't, you couldn't get in 73, so it's out of some other car. 373 gears, just verified. It's got positive traction and everything. The additional aftermarket sway bar. So hopefully somebody will want this and be willing to put some money back in the project piggy bank. And there's the car up on the lift with everything out from underneath of it now. Still got some hoses and wires. Got these janky exhaust hangers that bolt right through the floor, and this one was hanging on. And then all these tubes go up into a charcoal, I think it's a charcoal canister that actually sits behind the rear seat. So obviously that'll be all deleted. The front pinion seal was leaking for who knows how long, and so it was leaking out onto the drive shaft, and it was just slinging oil up in here. So I've got to degrease, clean up, because I've got to do some welding for the SpeedTech top mount for the shocks here and here. Mini tubs are going in, but I'll make that a different video because that may be somewhat involved. So making some progress. Yeah, it looks like when they did this car, they just kind of slapped some black paint up in here, and they didn't prep or anything like that. There's some rust there on this little stamped cross member. It's not too bad. So, but what I'm gonna have to do is, because the paint's flaking and it's all greasy up under here, what I'm gonna do is come up here with a wire wheel and clean everything off, which is messy and it takes forever, but I probably should do it. And then convert whatever little bits of rust like that I find. I'm not particularly concerned about replacing that piece. I'll neutralize the rust and get some rust encapsulator on it, because there'll be that piece kind of is the torsional member on the rear of the car, but I'll be adding a crossbar for the SpeedTech torque arm that goes kind of right across here, and it's considerably more beefy. There it is right there. Than the piece in there. So as long as we get the rust neutralized and get that welded in, I'm not concerned at all structurally. Now, if you go back up, that crossbar kind of snugs up between these frame rails. Unfortunately, it snugs up right where the old anti-sway bar brackets were booger welded in there. So basically what I've done is I've cut them off. They're welded on both sides, or I cut one off. And I'll slide the bracket forward, and if I can just take this down thin enough so that it works, then I won't deal with trying to surgically cut this weld off, because then I'll end up messing up the frame rail and stuff. So I will give that a try. All right, I'm part of the way through cleaning up under the back half of the car. I just wanted to give you a quick heads up on what I do when it comes to cleaning paint and rust and prepping. It's not quite the spray and pray method, just lay the paint on thick and heavy and cross your fingers. And it's not, factory nice either. So what I use primarily is one of these knotted wire wheels. Get them from Harbor Freight on a cheap Harbor Freight grinder, and go to town. It'll go through paint and grease, and it'll clean up rust pretty well. If you need to get into some tighter areas, you can use smaller wire wheels on a die grinder. But definitely use gloves, and particularly because those little wires come out and they'll turn your knuckles into a porcupine if you're not careful. And then it aerosols all the paint and all the rust and crap like that. So definitely use eye protection and a respirator if you can, because even if you don't care about getting cancer later in life, man, it makes you feel like crap for a couple of days while you work all that stuff out of your system. So please, highly recommend, if you're going to do this, use a respirator. Now, with regard to results, you can kind of see over here, there's a lot of surface rust that was under that paint that was flaking. Same thing over here, but I've cleaned this up. So you can still see where the surface rust was, but because I've gone over it with that wire wheel, it's kind of cleaned all the rust off, and now it's good enough that I can come back with some rust encapsulator paint, just like I did on the firewall. And this side is still I got the paint off, but I haven't got all the rust off. So all I need to do is just kind of make it that clean all the way around here. Here's what I'm talking about. This is why you need to wear eye pro, ear pro, etc. Been doing this for about an hour. As I'm working my way around and cleaning everything under the car, this is the driver's side recess where the front spring shackle or front spring point attaches, and I'll need to reuse that for the torque arm setup. But one thing I wanted to point out, I've kind of cleaned the rocker cavities out by bringing the shop vac down the front, but this seems like a separate section. And so when you take the shackle, the point out here, there was a rubber kind of plug, but it wasn't really a plug. It seemed like more of a vibration dampener or something. And when I pulled it out, there's an area up in here, and it seems to be blocked from the front, and it was full of junk. You can see, I don't know if there was an animal in here or what, but it is just full of crap. So if you are doing this as well, or even if you just want to kind of go once over the car and see where there may be some rust, this would be a good place to look, because it looks like there's just a bunch of stuff that kind of gets up in there, and you can I think you'd be able to reach up in here maybe and just pull out that rubber plug and check. So I'm going to pull all this junk out there, use some compressed air to blow it out, and then I've got a product from Eastwood that hopefully I can stick in there and spray some rust coating or something in there. So just a tip that I had not seen is here's a cavity where you might have a bunch of junk. Scratch what I just said. This cavity does connect to the rest of the rocker arm cavity. I just couldn't tell because there was just so much stuff jammed in there. It looked like it was a whole separate thing. So I worked on it for about 15 minutes with a pick trying to get things out, and I'll show you what was in there. So all that, foot for reference, all that was jammed into the rocker, and there's still more up there I haven't been able to get with the pick. I'm gonna try to put my borescope down there and get an eye out and see how we're gonna approach this. I'll try to get a picture of the borescope. Okay, I've got the borescope about halfway down the rocker, and I'm gonna start pulling it out since it's kind of unwieldy to do with one hand on the monitor. And it's fairly clean about halfway down, but as I start to pull it out, you can start to see some debris. There's a lot more stuff, acorns and things like that, some flaky, rusty stuff. You know, real colonoscopy style here. So there's still a lot more I need to get out. So now that I've broken everything free from all that batting that the mice had up in there, I guess I'm gonna go in there with the vacuum one more time and try to get that out, and then maybe with some compressed air. And I'm glad I got this out because this is gonna represent a couple of pounds of weight savings, I think. So yeah, interesting stuff all around. All right, I've got all the junk out of there. I verified with my borescope. Really handy tool, by the way. Harbor Freight one works great. Another point of interest that I found on this car, it seems like this left rear quarter was replaced at some point, or there was some patch panel made, because as I look down in here, number one, it's kind of got some rust. And as I was cleaning out, there's a little hole right here for some rust, not a big deal. But back in here, I found a couple of tails of a MIG. So it looks like somebody had been trying to repair this, and you know, sometimes when you're welding, the MIG wire misses completely and goes up, and when it touches, it blows off and leaves a little tail. Well, I found a couple of those in here, so somebody's definitely done some body work on this. And then right here, there's what seems to be the rusty remnants of a rivet or something. Same here. So yeah, it looks like somebody's repaired this, and there's a little rust in this area, kind of right here on this corner. Now, you're not going to be able to see it, and I'm going to clean it and rust convert it. So not a huge deal, but you know, you just find all these sorts of things and you start to pull the string on the sweater. And we'll continue. Okay, folks, I've gone ahead and stripped the tar out of the right side. I figured I'd just go ahead and strip it all before I start fabricating up the rest of the mini tubs on the other side. But as I said, you keep looking deeper, you keep finding problems. So look what I found. Front of the right rear wheel well. Big old chunk out of there where it's nice and rusty. What you can kind of see down in there is actually the inside of the outer rocker panel. So this whole thing was rusted out, and why I didn't see it is because they had put a significant amount of seam sealer. They just gooped it in all here. It was packed up in there, and when I ripped it all out, it just opened up. So they never even attempted to rust convert it or anything. So I'm just getting more and more disgusted with whoever did this to this car. Now, luckily, it's all localized. The front right corner was pretty bad, but you know, this is kind of cosmetic. So again, I'm just trying to get it together so I can do track days and autocross, and maybe 10 years down the road, I'll blow it all back apart and take it and get it stripped and professionally done. But that's just not in the cards right now. So because this isn't really structurally too concerning, I'm gonna clean it up as best I can, convert all the little areas of rust that I've found. Let's go ahead and start doing that. I don't exactly know I'm going to patch this yet, so maybe I'll make a little U-shaped metal channel, or that's probably what I'll do, and just sit it down in there once it's been rust converted and seal it over, knowing that it'll be there the next time that I go down this adventure. The other bit of excitement I found was I thought the trunk pan was solid, but when I hit it a little bit just to scuff it up with the wire wheel, for some reason the paint hadn't bubbled, but as soon as I hit it with the wire wheel, it blew through. So another area where I think that's, you know, there's a couple little spots here and there. Again, I could replace the trunk pan, but do I really want to for what I'm going to do with it? So more decisions, more rust. And just to add insult to injury, as I started to hit the spatter paint kind of coating in the back here with the wire wheel, it's just coming off, and there's just a ton of rust underneath of it. So the the paint was just hiding everything. Clearly somebody knew this needed a new trunk pan, and they just sprayed it with this stuff to hide it, and it's just bad. So I need to regroup and figure out what the heck am I gonna do. All right, what I'm gonna do is ignore the trunk pan for the time being. I'm still weighing my options, but I might have an idea, but I'll make that a different video. So in the meantime, what I did is obviously you can see I'm in the middle of finishing the mini tub on this side. But in preparation for that, I've kind of started to look to where I might need to add some seam welds and things. So where I needed to repair up under here, this is the spring perch, or where the spring pocket eye mounts. I've had to come in and weld this in because I mentioned earlier somebody had put some really janky subframe connectors, and they'd done sort of a half bolt, half weld thing, and there's this big ugly weld right here. So I had to cut that weld out. And then I've come back and I've kind of filled the hole that it made with this, and I'm gonna smooth that down. So fix that. The other thing I noticed was that, and I don't think this was anybody's specifically, I think this was the factory, but right here where these channels, these unibody frame rails are mounted, they kind of just grabbed it and bent it at the factory. And you can see like it's pretty crinkly and tortured here where the machine just stamped it out. And it gets pretty ugly. Now the rear coilovers are going to be mounted to a beam that goes between these two, so these need to have good bending stiffness. And I'm a little bit worried about some of this. The only place that I really was terribly worried with this itself was right here. In fact, they had bent it so much that it had creased, and it had a little basically a bend, like if you fatigue a aluminum can and it cracks. There was a crack here. And so what I did was I came in and I filled up the crack with a weld. I did the same thing on this side, right here. So it had cracked here. I think from the factory it had cracked. It was just under the undercoating. So I went back and I filled those cracks in. That should help prevent the stress risers from causing a fatigue crack in the future. I also came in here and filled in these two holes where the dummies had tried to weld these little extra brackets for the rear anti-sway bar and didn't get their welder settings right and blew a hole in it. So I fixed that there. Can't really see it as well here, but fixed that there. And then back on the theme of these unibody frame rails needing to take a lot of bending and just to stiffen the whole car up, there's already a nice thick plate right here that does two things. It buttresses this place, which is where the bump stop is mounted, one on each side. It also buttresses where the shock mount was in the original suspension. And so this is pretty beefy. So what I've done is I've come back and I've basically seam welded all along here to make advantage of this nice beefy plate that's sandwiched right next to this really poorly formed frame rail. So hopefully that'll bring a lot of stiffness and strength to this area without having to add a lot of custom stuff just by doing a little seam welding. Well, nice little clip for part one of the rear end video. I mentioned that I had found some rust, and I think I got the light better so you can kind of see just how bad it is. That's all been rust converted now, and so it's at least not getting any worse. But I said I was probably going to make a little patch panel to go in there, and this is what I'm talking about. So basically it's a channel made out of flat. This edge is profiled to fit just below this lip right here. There's a little kick right there, so I wouldn't have been able to make this piece without strinkers or stretchers. So I just slid it, bent it, and cut it, and then I kind of profiled it right there to kind of fit down in. So let's see if I can do it. It kind of is going to sit right up in here, and then it should press down, and it almost holds itself in. So you can kind of see that the back flange covers that rusty hole into the rocker cavity. This flange on the front here matches this piece. This kick kind of matches this little curve, and this little piece I beat down here kind of fits right in. So it's all, an 1/8 to 1/4 gap at most. But the plan is paint under here, paint this, and this will get placed in. And when I go around and do the sealer, the seam sealer, I will seal around here, and that'll hold it in, and we'll be good to go for now.